I opened the front door of my family home on Christmas morning at 8 and walked into what I thought would be a normal holiday. The living room was packed with wrapped boxes under the tree. My nephew Hugh running around in new sneakers that lit up when he walked. My sister Emma holding up a resort brochure and squealing about her upcoming vacation package. My brother Malcolm showing off the latest iPhone to his wife Lisa. My parents sat on the couch looking pleased with themselves. I stood there holding the coffee and pastries I'd brought, waiting for someone to acknowledge me. Nothing. They kept opening gifts, passing boxes around, laughing. I watched Malcolm tear into another package and pull out expensive headphones. Emma got jewelry. Hugh got 3 different video game systems. Even Lisa, who'd only been in the family for 2 years, had a pile of gifts with her name on them. I waited another 10 minutes. Then I asked where mine were. Just a simple question. My mother, Meredith, looked up from her new tablet like she'd forgotten I was standing there. She said, "Why would they waste money on me when I was the family disappointment?" Just like that? Matter of fact, like she was explaining why you don't buy dog food when you don't have a dog. My father, Alfred, handed Malcolm another box and told him it was the extra battery pack for his new phone. Never even glanced at me. Emma laughed and said, "At least now I knew where I stood, at the bottom." As always, Malcolm smirked and made some comment about how they only invited me out of pity anyway. Hugh, my 9-year-old nephew, looked right at me and said even he knew Uncle was a pathetic failure. I need to give you context here because otherwise this sounds insane. 6 years ago, when I was 26, my parents were drowning. Alfred had made some bad investments. Meredith's spending had gotten out of control, and they were 3 months from foreclosure on the family house. The same house where we're all standing right now. The house where Alfred grew up, where his parents lived, the one with all the family history and photos and memories. I had just started making decent money in my consulting business. Nothing crazy, but stable income. I bought the house from the bank, paid off their debt, let them keep living there, put everything in my name legally, told them they could stay as long as they needed. Emma and Malcolm were still in college then. They moved back after graduating. Emma brought Hugh when she had him. Malcolm brought Lisa when they got married. Everyone just kept living there because it was convenient and free. But here's the thing they never forgave me for. I didn't become a doctor. That was the family legacy, the whole point of everything. Alfred's father was a doctor. Alfred was a doctor before he retired. They had my whole life planned out. Medical school applications ready, connections at hospitals. I told them when I was 23 that I wasn't going to medical school. I was going to build my own business instead. They called it betrayal. Said I was throwing away the family name. Alfred told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Meredith cried for weeks like someone had died. Emma and Malcolm, who were still following the approved path at the time, treated me like I'd committed some unforgivable sin. Emma's doing her residency now. Malcolm works at a medical supply company. They're both exactly where the family wanted them, and I'm the one who owns their house. The irony isn't lost on me. They live rent-free in a property I purchased, in rooms I pay the taxes on, using utilities I cover, and they treat me like garbage because I chose a different career. The disappointment thing started small. Little comments about how I wasn't living up to my potential, how I'd never be as respected as a doctor, how I was wasting my intelligence on meaningless work. It got worse over the years. Family dinners where they'd talk about Emma's achievements and Malcolm's prospects and completely skip over me. Holidays where they'd introduce me to relatives as their other son, the one who does something with computers or whatever. Birthday parties where they'd forget to get me a card. I kept showing up because they're my family and I kept thinking maybe it would change. So Christmas morning, standing there with my coffee and pastries, listening to my mother call me a disappointment and my nephew call me a failure, I made a decision. I smiled, genuinely smiled, put the card they'd left for me on the side table. It said, "Maybe when you're worth something." I told them this was the best Christmas ever. My father asked if I was going to cry now. Called it typical. I said no. I was just appreciating the honesty. I left at noon, drove back to my apartment across town. The apartment I'd bought 2 years ago when I realized I didn't want to live in that house anymore, even though it was mine. I sat on my couch and thought about every single bill I paid for that property. the mortgage I'd cleared, the property taxes, the insurance, the water heater I'd replaced last winter, the roof repairs from the storm damage. I thought about the legal documents in my safe, the deed with my name on it, the paperwork showing I was the sole owner, the agreements I'd signed when I bought the place. The fact that nowhere in any of those documents did it say my family had any right to stay there beyond my permission. Permission I'd given freely for 6 years while they treated me like trash. I spent Christmas afternoon going through my files, every utility bill, every tax payment, every maintenance record. I'd kept everything organized because that's what you do when you own property. I pulled out the deed and read through it again, looked at the legal description of the property, verified exactly what I owned and what rights came with that ownership. My phone started ringing around 6. Meredith, I didn't answer. Alfred called 20 minutes later, ignored it. Emma sent a text where I'd gone, deleted it. They called 3 more times that night. I watched Netflix and ordered Chinese food. The next day was quiet. 2 calls, then nothing for a few days. I went to work, handled my clients, lived my life, enjoyed not spending every holiday being reminded that I wasn't good enough for people who couldn't even pay their own mortgage. New Year's Eve came and went. I spent it with friends from work, people who actually respected me. We watched the ball drop at someone's house party. I didn't think about my family at all. Didn't miss them. Didn't wonder what they were doing. January 2nd, I woke up to 41 missed calls, all from different family numbers. Meredith, Alfred, Emma, Malcolm, even Lissa, who barely ever called me. The voicemails were panicked. We didn't mean it like that. Please come back. Something happened. We need to talk. Please answer. I sat there looking at my phone and laughed. 6 years of paying their bills. 6 years of being treated like I wasn't worth their time. 6 years of watching them live in my house while calling me a failure. And now something happened and they needed to talk. I deleted every voicemail without listening to them fully. Blocked their numbers, made coffee, thought about what I was going to do next. Because I'd been planning this for a long time. Since the first time Alfred told me I'd never be as important as a real doctor. Since the first birthday they forgot. Since the first family photo where they conveniently left me out. Not because I loved the work, though I did, but because I knew eventually I'd need leverage, resources, the ability to handle whatever came next. And now it was here. They needed something from me. After everything, they actually needed me. I finished my coffee and started making calls. Update 1. So, that first post blew up way more than I expected. Got a lot of comments telling me to stand my ground. Some people saying I should hear them out. And one guy who kept insisting I was legally required to give them 60 days notice before doing anything. That last one was actually helpful because it made me check my state's tenant laws real carefully. Turns out when you let family live in your house without a formal lease agreement and they don't pay rent, the legal situation gets complicated. Not complicated in a bad way for me. Complicated in a they have way less protection than they think kind of way. But I'm getting ahead of myself. January 2nd, 41 missed calls. I blocked everyone and spent the morning working. Around 11 o'clock, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole and saw Emma standing there in her scrubs, apparently on her way to or from the hospital. I opened the door. She started talking immediately. Said she'd driven across town to find me because I wasn't answering my phone. Said something had happened and the whole family was freaking out. Said they needed to talk to me urgently about the house. I asked, what about the house? She told me Malcolm had been going through some old documents in the basement. Something about organizing their storage and he'd found the actual deed with my name on it. Apparently, in 6 years, nobody had ever looked at who legally owned the property they were living in. I laughed. Emma got defensive. She said they'd always assumed it was still in Alfred's name, that I just helped with the mortgage payments or something. I asked how exactly they thought that worked when I'd literally bought the house from the bank. She said they didn't realize that's what I'd done. They thought I'd just given Alfred money to save the house. This is the thing about my family. They've spent so many years dismissing everything I do that they genuinely didn't comprehend the basic financial reality of their own living situation. I had purchased a house. I owned a house. They lived in my house. But because I wasn't a doctor and therefore wasn't worth taking seriously, They'd never bothered to understand what any of that meant. Emma kept talking. She said Malcolm had freaked out when he saw the deed, called Alfred. Alfred had apparently had no idea either. They'd all had this emergency family meeting on New Year's Day where they'd gone through every document they could find. Realized I paid all the bills. Realized my name was on everything. Realized they had been living in my property as guests for 6 years while treating me like trash. I asked Emma what she wanted me to do about it. She said they wanted to talk to explain to work something out. I asked why I would want to work anything out with people who'd spent Christmas morning calling me a pathetic failure. She said they didn't mean it like that. I asked how exactly did they mean it when Meredith literally said I was the family disappointment and Alfred asked if I was going to cry. Emma tried a different approach. She said they were family, that we needed to get past this. That yes, they'd been harsh, but I had to understand where they were coming from. I asked where they were coming from. She said it had been really hard on all of them when I'd refused medical school. That Alfred had felt like I was rejecting everything he'd built. That Meredith had been embarrassed in front of her friends when their son chose business consulting instead of medicine. I stood there listening to my sister explain that their cruelty was justified because I'd hurt their feelings by not living the life they'd planned for me. She said it like it made perfect sense. Like obviously I should understand why they'd spent years making me feel worthless. It was because I'd disappointed them first. I asked Emma if she'd driven all the way here just to tell me their abuse was my fault. She said it wasn't abuse. It was just that they'd had expectations and I'd let them down. She said families are supposed to support each other through difficult transitions. I asked if calling me a failure in front of a 9-year-old was supporting me through a transition. She said I was being dramatic. Then she switched tactics again. Asked if I had thought about what would happen to Hugh if I kicked them all out. Said he was settled in his school district. Said Emma's residency program required a stable home address and if she had to move suddenly, it would mess up her paperwork. Said Malcolm and Lissa were planning to start a family and needed stability. Said Alfred and Meredith were getting older and couldn't handle the stress of moving. I asked Emma if she remembered that card they'd left me on Christmas. The one that said maybe when you're worth something. She said yes. I asked if she thought that was an appropriate thing to give someone who owned the house she lived in. She said I was holding a grudge, that it was just a card, that I needed to be more mature about this. I told Emma to leave. She said we weren't done talking. I said, yes, we were. She said I couldn't just throw them out on the street. I said I could do whatever I wanted with my own property. She said there had to be laws about this kind of thing. I said she was welcome to look into it. She stood there for another minute trying to think of something else to say. Then she left. I closed the door and immediately called my real estate lawyer, the one I'd worked with when I bought the house. Asked him about the legal situation with family members living in a property I owned without a formal lease. He asked a bunch of questions. Were they paying rent? Was there any written agreement? Had they been there over a year? Did they receive mail there? Was it their primary residence? He explained that even without a lease, they'd established some basic tenant rights just by living there for years. But because they paid no rent and had no written agreement, I had significantly more freedom than I would with normal tenants. He asked what I wanted to do. I said I wanted them out. He asked if I was sure. I said completely sure. He said he'd draft the paperwork. That was a Wednesday. By Friday, I had formal written notice ready to go. 30 days to vacate the property. My lawyer said 30 days was more than generous given the circumstances and that I could probably do shorter, but 30 days looked better if anyone tried to challenge it later. I drove to the house Friday evening. Everyone was there. They'd been expecting me apparently. Emma must have told them about our conversation. I walked in and they were all sitting in the living room like some kind of intervention setup. Alfred in his usual chair, Meredith on the couch next to Emma, Malcolm and Lissa on the love seat. Even Hugh was there playing on one of his new video game systems in the corner. Meredith started talking before I'd even closed the door. She said they'd been doing a lot of thinking, that maybe they'd been too harsh, that they wanted to have a real conversation about everything. I handed Alfred the envelope with the eviction notice. He opened it, read it, looked at me, asked if I was serious. I said completely serious. Malcolm stood up, said I couldn't do this. I asked why not. He said because they were family. I said family doesn't call each other disappointments on Christmas morning. Lisa said I was overreacting. I asked how she'd feel if her family treated her the way mine treated me. She said that wasn't the point. Alfred kept reading the notice. Said 30 days wasn't enough time. I said it was more than enough time. Emma said she couldn't move in 30 days with her residency schedule. I said she should have thought about that before laughing about me being at the bottom. Malcolm said they didn't have money for deposits on a new place. I said that wasn't my problem. Meredith started crying. Said she couldn't believe I was doing this to them, that after everything they'd done for me. I asked what exactly they'd done for me. She said they'd raised me, given me opportunities, supported me. I asked if she meant supported me the way she'd supported me on Christmas when she said I wasn't worth wasting money on. This went on for over an hour. They took turns trying different approaches. Guilt about Hugh, concern about Emma's career, Malcolm and Lisa mentioning they were trying for a baby and needed stability. Alfred talking about his health issues, Meredith bringing up family legacy and what their parents would think. Everyone saying I was being cruel and vindictive. I stood there and let them talk. Let them cycle through every manipulation they could think of. Then I asked one question. Did they actually think any of this would work? Did they genuinely believe that after 6 years of being treated like garbage, I would change my mind because they suddenly cared about family? Alfred said I was being unreasonable, that I was taking one bad day and using it to destroy their lives. I said it wasn't one bad day. It was 6 years of bad days. It was every birthday they forgot, every family photo I wasn't in, every holiday where they treated me like I didn't exist. Every comment about how I'd never be as important as a real doctor. Every time they benefited from living in my house while acting like I was worthless. Malcolm said I was twisting things, that they'd always loved me, that families disagree sometimes. I said this wasn't disagreement. This was systematic disrespect. Emma said I was remembering wrong, that it hadn't been that bad. I pulled out my phone and showed them the card. The one from Christmas, the one I'd kept. Maybe when you're worth something. The room went quiet. Meredith said that wasn't meant to be taken seriously. It was just a joke. I asked what part was funny. She didn't answer. Alfred said I was being too sensitive, that I'd always been too sensitive. Malcolm agreed. Said I'd always taken things too personally, that I couldn't handle criticism. I looked at all of them. These people who'd spent years making me feel small, who'd lived in my house rent-free while telling me I was a disappointment, who were now sitting in my living room trying to convince me that their cruelty was my fault for not having thicker skin. I told them they had 30 days. Alfred said he'd get a lawyer. I said, good luck with that. Malcolm said they'd fight this. I said, go ahead. Emma said, this would destroy the family. I said, they'd already destroyed it. Lisa called me selfish. Meredith said, I'd regret this. I left the notice on the coffee table and walked out. Got in my car and drove back to my apartment. My phone started ringing before I'd made it 3 blocks. Alfred, then Meredith, then Emma, then Malcolm. I let them ring. Spent the weekend at my apartment doing absolutely nothing and enjoying every minute of it. Monday morning, I got an email from a lawyer I'd never heard of. Some guy Malcolm had apparently hired over the weekend. The email said they were requesting I resend the eviction notice and enter into mediation to resolve this family dispute. Said my actions were causing undue hardship. Said they believed we could reach a reasonable compromise if I was willing to be rational. I forwarded it to my lawyer and asked what he thought. He said it was standard intimidation stuff, that they had no real legal grounds to fight the eviction, that mediation was voluntary, and I didn't have to agree to anything. He asked if I wanted him to respond. Said yes. He sent something back that basically said thanks, but no thanks. The family lawyer sent another email, this one longer, talking about Hugh's well-being, Emma's career, the emotional trauma of forced relocation, Malcolm and Lisa's family planning, my parents' age and health. Said I had a moral obligation to consider these factors. My lawyer responded that we'd see them in court if they wanted to fight it. By Wednesday, the social media had started not from my family directly, but from extended relatives, cousins, aunts, uncles, people I barely knew. Messages asking what was going on, saying they'd heard I was kicking my parents out, asking if that was true, telling me family should stick together. Some of them getting nasty about it. I realized my family had been working the phones all week, telling their version of events, making themselves look like victims. Probably leaving out the part where they called me a failure and said I wasn't worth their money. Definitely leaving out the part where they'd been living rent-free in my house for 6 years. Thursday afternoon, my doorbell rang again. I looked through the peephole and saw 2 people I didn't recognize. Older couple. I opened the door. They introduced themselves as Alfred's brother and his wife. My uncle and aunt who I'd maybe met 5 times in my entire life. They said they needed to talk to me about the situation. I asked what situation. They said the eviction. I asked how that was their business. They said family helped family. That Alfred and Meredith had raised me and this was how I was repaying them. I asked if Alfred had told them he'd called me a disappointment on Christmas. They looked confused. Said that must be a misunderstanding. I said there was no misunderstanding. They tried for 20 minutes to convince me to reconsider. Talked about family values, about forgiveness, about being the bigger person. I asked if being the bigger person meant continuing to let people live in my house after they treated me like garbage. They said I was being dramatic. I closed the door. The calls kept coming. More relatives, some friends of my parents, people from their social circle, everyone with the same message, that I was being unreasonable, that I was destroying the family over nothing, that I needed to think about what I was doing. Nobody asked my side of the story. Nobody cared what had actually happened. They just knew I was evicting my parents and that made me the villain. Friday evening, Emma showed up at my apartment again. She looked exhausted, said she'd been working double shifts and dealing with all of this. That she needed me to understand something. I asked what? She said they were desperate. That they genuinely didn't have anywhere to go. That 30 days wasn't enough time to find a place that could fit all of them. I asked why they all had to stay together. She said because they were a family. I said maybe they should have thought about that before treating me like I wasn't part of it. She said I was being impossible, that I was using my money as a weapon, that I was exactly what they'd always said I was. I asked what I'd always been according to them. She said selfish, focused on material success instead of what really mattered, willing to abandon family when things got difficult. I asked if she was serious, if she actually believed that. She said it was true. That I'd proven it by choosing business over medicine. That I'd proven it again by refusing to forgive one bad Christmas. I told Emma she needed to leave and not come back. She said she wasn't leaving until I listened. I said there was nothing to listen to. She said I was throwing away my whole family over pride. I said they'd thrown me away years ago. I just finally stopped pretending it hadn't happened. She left. The apartment was quiet. My phone showed 6 missed calls, 3 voicemails, multiple texts, all from different family members, all saying the same things in different ways. That I was wrong, that I was cruel, that I needed to reconsider. I sat on my couch and realized this was just the beginning. They were going to fight this with everything they had. Not because they cared about me, but because they'd built their lives on the assumption that I'd always be there to support them while they treated me like nothing. 23 days left on the eviction notice. Update 2. Quick update to everyone who's been following this. Some of you called exactly what would happen next, and you were right. Shout out to the commenter who said they'd try to establish tenant rights retroactively. You nailed it. Day 16 of the 30-day notice. I got a certified letter from Malcolm's lawyer, not an email this time. Actual certified mail that required my signature. The letter claimed that my family had been paying me rent all along. Said they'd been giving me cash payments monthly for the past 6 years. Said they had records of these transactions and therefore had established a formal landlord-tenant relationship that required proper eviction proceedings. I called my lawyer, immediately read him the letter. He laughed, asked if I had any records of receiving rent payments. I said obviously not because I'd never received a single dollar from any of them. He said that's what he figured. He asked if I'd deposited any regular cash amounts that could look like rent. I said no. He said then they were bluffing and it was a weak bluff at that. But here's the thing about desperate people. They don't care if their bluff is weak. They just need to create enough confusion to buy more time. Malcolm's lawyer sent my lawyer a spreadsheet showing 6 years of supposed monthly rent payments. $1,200 a month every month for 72 months. Added up to over $86,000 they claimed to have paid me in cash. My lawyer asked for proof of these cash payments. Bank withdrawal records showing they'd taken out that much money. Receipts I'd supposedly given them. Anything concrete? Malcolm's lawyer said the transactions were all cash, so there were no bank records. Said I'd never given receipts because it was a family arrangement. Said they had witnesses who'd seen them hand me money. I knew exactly what they were doing. They were trying to manufacture a paper trail that didn't exist, hoping that by creating enough documentation on their end, they could make it look legitimate. My lawyer said it wouldn't work, but it would slow things down. That we'd have to respond to their claims that a judge would want to see both sides. Meanwhile, the actual eviction deadline kept getting closer. Day 18. I drove past the house on my way home from a client meeting. Saw a moving truck in the driveway. Thought maybe they'd accepted reality and started packing. I was wrong. They were moving stuff in, not out. Malcolm and Lissa were unloading boxes from the truck. I pulled over and watched. They carried in what looked like furniture, a dresser, a bookshelf, some chairs. I sat there trying to figure out what they were doing. Then it clicked. They were establishing more permanent residence, making it look like they'd invested in the property, creating more evidence that this was their long-term home. I got out of my car and walked up the driveway. Malcolm saw me coming. He didn't stop unloading. I asked what he was doing. He said moving in furniture they'd had in storage. I asked why he was doing that when they were supposed to be moving out in 12 days. He said they weren't moving out, that their lawyer said I couldn't force them out without proper cause, that paying tenants had rights. I told Malcolm he'd never paid me $1. He said that wasn't true, that they'd been paying me regularly, that I'd just been pocketing the cash and not reporting it. I asked if he was seriously trying to claim I'd been committing tax fraud. He said he wasn't claiming anything, just stating facts about their rent payments. Lissa came out of the house. She saw me and got defensive immediately. Said I had no right to harass them while they were moving their belongings. I said I had every right since it was my property. She said it was their home, that they'd been living there for years, that I couldn't just throw them out because I was having a tantrum. I asked Lissa how her marriage was holding up under all this stress. She looked confused. I said it must be hard being married to someone who was about to lose his childhood home because his family treated his brother like garbage. She said that wasn't what happened. I asked what did happen then. She said the family had been tough on me sometimes, but I'd overreacted. That Malcolm had always defended me when I wasn't around. That he'd told them to be nicer. That he'd tried to include me in things. I asked for a single example. She couldn't give me one. Said I was putting her on the spot. I said no, she was lying. Malcolm came back out. Told Lissa to go inside. She did. He stood there with his arms crossed and asked what I wanted. I said I wanted to know what his endgame was. He said his endgame was keeping his family housed. I said then he should have thought about that before going along with treating me like a disappointment. He said he'd never called me that. I said he sat there on Christmas while everyone else did and he laughed. He said he didn't laugh. I asked if he defended me then. He said it all happened so fast. I asked how fast Christmas morning was. How there wasn't enough time in several hours to say one word in my defense. Malcolm switched tactics. Said this wasn't about Christmas. This was about me having power and enjoying using it. That I'd always resented that he and Emma followed the path I was too scared to take. That I'd bought the house just so I could hold it over everyone. That deep down I knew I was the disappointment and this was my way of making everyone else hurt too. I stood there listening to my brother explain my own motivations to me. Tell me what I really felt, why I'd really done things. He was rewriting history in real time, making himself and Emma the victims of my jealousy, making my parents the casualties of my resentment, making me the villain who'd been planning this all along. I asked Malcolm if he actually believed what he was saying. He said yes. That he'd been thinking about it a lot. That everything made sense when you looked at it that way. That I'd never forgiven them for being better than me. For living up to expectations I couldn't meet. For being the children Alfred and Meredith deserved. He said that last part looking right at me. The children they deserved. Like he and Emma were the real family and I was just some mistake that had happened, some inferior version they'd gotten stuck with. I turned around and got back in my car. Malcolm yelled after me that running away wouldn't change anything, that the truth was the truth. I drove to my lawyer's office, walked in without an appointment. His secretary said he was with another client. I said I'd wait, sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes. When he was free, I went in and told him everything, the furniture, the fake rent claims, Malcolm's speech about me being jealous. My lawyer asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. He said I didn't look fine. I said I needed to know what would happen if they refused to leave on day 30. He said then we'd file for formal eviction through the courts. That with their false claims about rent, it might take a few months to fully resolve. I said months. He said yes. That they were clearly planning to drag this out as long as possible. That every delay tactic they used added time. That the legal system moved slowly. I asked what my options were. He said I could offer them money to leave. Cash for keys. Give them enough for first month, last month, and deposit somewhere else in exchange for being out by the deadline. I asked how much that would cost me. He did some math, said probably $15,000 to $20,000 depending on where they were looking to move. I laughed. He asked why I was laughing. I said because 6 years ago, I'd paid off their debt and bought their house and saved them from foreclosure. And now I was supposed to pay them more money to get them to leave the house I'd saved. He said it wasn't fair, but it was practical. That sometimes practical mattered more than fair. I said I wanted to think about it. He said I should think fast because we had 12 days left. I went home. My apartment felt too quiet. I ordered food, didn't eat it, sat on my couch thinking about $15,000 about how my family would take that money and still hate me. Still tell everyone I was the villain. Still rewrite history to make themselves right. My phone rang. Meredith. I'd unblocked them all a few days before because my lawyer said we needed to maintain communication channels for legal purposes. I answered. She asked if I'd thought about their offer. I asked what offer. She said the offer to forget all this and let them stay. I said that wasn't an offer. She said it was the only reasonable solution. That we could all just move past Christmas and pretend it never happened. I asked if she was serious. She said families forgive. That's what families do. They forgive and move on. I asked Meredith if she'd forgiven me for not going to medical school. She said that was different. I asked how. She said because that was a real betrayal. That was me rejecting everything they'd built, everything they'd worked for, their legacy and their dreams. I asked what Christmas was then. She said Christmas was just words. That words didn't matter as much as actions. That my actions were destroying the family. I asked about her actions. About 6 years of words telling me I wasn't good enough. She said that was just disappointment. Just her being honest about how she felt. She said I should respect her honesty. I asked Meredith if she'd ever once considered how her honesty made me feel. She said feelings weren't facts. That just because something hurt didn't make it wrong to say that if I was a disappointment, then telling me that was actually kind, helping me understand reality. I hung up. She called back immediately. I didn't answer. Emma called, then Alfred, then Malcolm again. I turned my phone off and sat in the dark. Day 22. 8 days left. I went back to the house. This time Alfred was there alone, sitting in the living room. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. He saw me come in and didn't get up. He asked if I was there to gloat. I said I was there to check on my property. He said it stopped being just property when people lived in it, when it became their home. I asked whose fault it was that they'd lived there without ever checking who owned it. Alfred said it was my fault for not being clear, for letting them assume, for taking advantage of their trust. I asked how I'd taken advantage. He said by holding this over them, by waiting for the perfect moment to use it as leverage, by planning this revenge for years. I asked Alfred if he remembered the day I told him I wasn't going to medical school. He said, of course. I asked what he'd said to me. He looked confused. I said he'd told me I was making the biggest mistake of my life, that I'd never amount to anything, that I was throwing away my only chance at respectability. He said he'd been trying to help me, trying to show me the right path. I said he'd been trying to control me. He said control and guidance weren't the same thing, that parents were supposed to guide their children, that it wasn't his fault I'd chosen wrong. I asked Alfred if he'd ever considered that maybe his path wasn't the only right one. He said medicine was noble, important, respected. What I did was just making money. I asked if making money was bad when it had saved his house. He said that was different. Everything was different when it benefited them. My choices were wrong until they needed the results of those choices. My career was meaningless until it paid their bills. I was a disappointment until I was useful. And now that I wasn't being useful anymore, I was back to being just a disappointment. Alfred said I was twisting his words. That he'd always loved me. That love and approval weren't the same thing. That he could love me while still wishing I'd made better choices. I asked if he loved me on Christmas morning. He said that was a bad day. That everyone had bad days. I said it wasn't one bad day. He said yes, it was. That everything else I was remembering was exaggerated, that I was sensitive and took things wrong, that the family had always treated me fine and I was choosing to remember only the negative, that this was my problem, not theirs. I walked out, got in my car. Alfred followed me outside. He said we weren't finished talking. I said yes, we were. He said if I went through with this, he'd never forgive me. I said that was fine. He said I'd regret it, that I'd be alone. That family was all anyone really had. I drove away. In my rearview mirror, I could see him standing in the driveway of the house I owned, the house I'd saved, the house he'd lived in for 6 years without ever once saying thank you. Day 25, 5 days left. My phone was full of messages from relatives I barely knew. All of them telling me what a terrible person I was. How I was abandoning family. How I'd changed. How money had corrupted me. How the old me would never have done this. The old me wouldn't have done this. They were right about that. The old me would have kept paying their bills and showing up for holidays and pretending everything was fine. The old me would have believed them when they said it was just disappointment, just honesty, just tough love. But I wasn't the old me anymore. I was the me who'd spent 6 years watching them live in comfort while treating me like garbage. I was the me who'd built a business they dismissed. I was the me who'd saved their house and gotten a card that said, maybe when you're worth something. I was the me who was done. My lawyer called, said Malcolm's lawyer had requested another extension, said they needed more time to find suitable housing, that 30 days wasn't adequate for a family with a child. I said, no extension. He said, are you sure? I said, completely sure. He said, okay, that we'd file the formal eviction petition the day after the 30-day deadline, that we'd request expedited processing, that we'd attach all my documentation showing ownership and payment history, that we'd contest their fake rent claims with evidence showing I'd never deposited any regular cash payments. 5 days, then this would move from family drama to legal action. Malcolm's lawyer could file whatever motions he wanted. Emma could work whatever angle she planned. Meredith could cry. Alfred could threaten. None of it would change the fundamental reality. I owned the house, they didn't, and their time was running out. Final update. Day 30 came on a Thursday. I took the day off work, drove to the house at 9 o'clock in the morning. The driveway was full of cars. Not just my family's vehicles, but other people too. I recognized Alfred's brother's truck. Some cars I didn't know. I parked on the street and walked up. The front door was locked. My key didn't work. They'd changed the locks on my own house. I stood there for a second processing that. Then I called my lawyer. He said changing locks was illegal, that it was technically a lockout and I could call the police. I said I'd handle it differently. I knocked. Malcolm answered. He had his phone out already recording. Said he wanted evidence of whatever I was about to do. I said he'd changed the locks on my property. He said their property that they'd established residence and had rights. I said the 30 days were up. He said they weren't leaving. Behind him, I could see people gathered in the living room. Alfred and Meredith, Emma with Hugh, Lissa, the uncle and aunt from before, 2 other people I didn't recognize. Malcolm said they'd called everyone, that they had witnesses to document how I was harassing them, trying to illegally evict them from their home. I asked Malcolm if he was finished. He said this was just starting, that he'd fight me every step of the way, that he'd make this as expensive and difficult as possible, that I'd regret trying to destroy his family. I walked back to my car, got my laptop, sat in the front seat, and filed the formal eviction petition right there. My lawyer had everything ready. I just had to click submit. The court date was set for 12 days out, expedited like my lawyer had requested. Malcolm's lawyer filed a response the same day, claimed I was retaliating against paying tenants, that I had accepted years of rent payments in cash, that I'd never reported the income, that I was now trying to evict them illegally to cover up my own tax evasion. My lawyer said their strategy was clear. Make me look like the criminal. Make themselves look like victims. Hope a judge would be sympathetic to a family being thrown out by a greedy landlord. He said it wouldn't work, but it would make the hearing more complicated. I pulled every financial record I had. 6 years of bank statements showing no regular cash deposits that could be rent. Tax returns showing the house as my primary residence for years before I'd moved to my apartment. Property tax payments all from my account. Insurance payments. Utility bills, everything with my name on it, and no indication I'd ever received $1 from them. My lawyer compiled it all, added a timeline showing when I'd bought the house, when I'd moved out, when each family member had moved in. Showed there was never any formal lease, never any rental agreement, never any discussion of rent, just me letting family stay in my house while I paid all the expenses. Malcolm's lawyer submitted their evidence, the spreadsheet showing supposed rent payments, statements from Alfred and Meredith saying they'd paid me cash every month, a declaration from Emma saying she'd witnessed the transactions. All of it carefully worded. All of it completely fabricated. The hearing was in a small courtroom, family court building. I got there early with my lawyer. My family showed up 20 minutes before the hearing. All of them. Malcolm in a suit. Emma in professional clothes. Alfred and Meredith dressed like they were going to church. Even Hugh was there, probably for sympathy. We waited in the hallway. They sat on one side, I sat on the other. Malcolm kept glancing at me. Emma looked straight ahead. Alfred and Meredith whispered to each other. Their lawyer was a middle-aged woman who looked wide. The judge called us in. Both sides presented. Malcolm's lawyer went first, painted a picture of a family who'd been faithfully paying rent for years, who'd built their lives in this house, who had a child in school, who were being suddenly evicted by a landlord who wanted to avoid taxes and punish them for personal reasons. My lawyer went next, showed the financial records, explained the history, presented the deed, showing I'd owned the property for 6 years, showed the property tax records, the utility bills, everything, demonstrating that this was my house and I'd been covering all expenses while they contributed nothing. The judge asked Malcolm's lawyer for proof of the cash payments. She presented the spreadsheet. The judge asked for bank records showing withdrawals. She said there weren't any because the payments came from money they'd saved. The judge asked where they'd gotten $1,200 in cash every month for 6 years without it appearing anywhere in their finances. She didn't have an answer. The judge looked at the declarations from Alfred, Meredith, and Emma. Asked why they'd been paying cash instead of using normal payment methods. Malcolm's lawyer said it was a family arrangement that cash was more convenient. The judge asked if they had any receipts I'd given them. She said I'd never provided receipts. The judge asked me directly if I'd ever received rent from them. I said no. He asked if I'd ever asked for rent. I said no. He asked why not. I said because they were family and I was trying to help them. He asked when that had changed. I said when they made it clear they didn't consider me family anymore. Malcolm's lawyer objected. Said my feelings weren't relevant. The judge said feelings were exactly relevant in a case about family members and informal housing arrangements. He asked Malcolm directly if he'd paid me rent. Malcolm said yes. The judge asked him to describe one specific payment. What month? What day? Where it happened? How much exactly? Malcolm described January 6th years ago. Said he'd handed me $1,200 in the living room. The judge asked if anyone else was present. Malcolm said Alfred was there. The judge asked Alfred if he remembered this. Alfred said yes. The judge asked what I'd done with the money. Alfred said I'd put it in my pocket. My lawyer presented my bank records for that month. Showed no cash deposit anywhere near $1,200. Showed no pattern of cash deposits that would indicate regular rent payments. The judge looked at Malcolm and Alfred, asked if they were saying, I'd been collecting $72,000 in cash over 6 years and never depositing it. Neither of them answered right away. Then Malcolm said maybe I deposited it in smaller amounts. The judge asked my lawyer if the records showed that. My lawyer said no, that there was no pattern of unusual cash deposits at all. The judge asked Malcolm's lawyer if she had anything else. She said her clients were credible people, that doctors and medical professionals wouldn't lie under oath, that their word should count for something. My lawyer said Emma wasn't a doctor yet, just a resident, that Malcolm worked in medical supply sales, that Alfred was retired, that their professions didn't make them more credible than anyone else. The judge took 10 minutes, came back, and said he was granting the eviction. That the evidence clearly showed no rental agreement had ever existed. That the family had been guests in my home, that I had the right to revoke that invitation, that they had 14 days to vacate the property. Malcolm's lawyer asked for more time, said 14 days wasn't enough for a family with a child. The judge said they'd already had 30 days notice and had chosen to fight instead of preparing to move. That 14 days was standard, and he wasn't extending it. He dismissed the case. We walked out. My family stood in the hallway. Malcolm was already on his phone with his lawyer. Emma looked pale. Alfred kept shaking his head. Meredith was crying. Hugh asked why everyone was upset. Emma told him to be quiet. I walked past them. Malcolm called after me, asked if I was happy now, if this was what I wanted, if destroying them made me feel better about being a failure. I kept walking. My lawyer said the sheriff would enforce the eviction if they weren't out in 14 days. That I should stay away from the property until then, that any contact should go through him. I said fine. The next week was quiet. I didn't hear from them directly. My lawyer said Malcolm's lawyer had called asking if I'd accept cash for keys, if I'd give them money to leave peacefully. I said no. He said they'd asked for $20,000. I said they could ask for $1 million, and the answer would still be no. Day 41. 3 days before the sheriff was scheduled to enforce the eviction, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was Emma. She'd gotten a new phone. Apparently, the text said they were packing, that they'd be out before the deadline, that she wanted me to know Hugh was crying every night, that this was traumatizing him, that whatever I felt about them, he didn't deserve this. I didn't respond. She sent another text. Said they'd found a 3-bedroom apartment across town, that it cost twice what they could afford, that Malcolm and Lissa were taking the 3rd bedroom and Hugh was sleeping in the living room, that Alfred and Meredith were staying with the uncle temporarily until they found something. That the family was being split up because of me. I blocked the new number. She texted from another one, said she'd asked around at the hospital, that people knew people, that word was spreading about what I'd done, that her professional reputation was being affected, that her colleagues were asking questions about why her family was being evicted, that I was ruining her career. I blocked that number too. My lawyer called, said they'd confirmed they'd be out by the deadline, that we should schedule a walkthrough for day 44 to verify they'd left and document the property's condition. I said, okay. Day 44. I met my lawyer at the house at 10 o'clock in the morning. The driveway was empty. The lockbox I'd had changed back to my key was still there. We opened the door and went inside. The house was trashed. Not violently, but thoroughly. Every room had something. Marks on the walls where they'd removed pictures and furniture carelessly. Scratches on the hardwood floors from dragging things. Stains on the carpet. The kitchen cabinets were all left open and empty. The bathrooms had soap scum and grime like they hadn't cleaned in weeks. My lawyer took photos, said this was normal spite behavior, that people leaving involuntarily often left places in poor condition. Said I could sue for damages, but it probably wasn't worth it. I walked through each room, thought about the family who'd lived here, who'd taken everything I'd given them, and decided it wasn't enough. In the living room, I found something sitting on the mantel where they'd left it deliberately. The Christmas card, the one that said, maybe when you're worth something, they'd left it there as a final message, a reminder that to them I'd never be worth anything, no matter what I did. I picked it up, put it in my pocket, took one last look around the empty house. My lawyer asked if I was okay. I said I was fine. He said, what was I going to do with the place? I said, I didn't know yet. Maybe sell it. Maybe rent it to actual tenants who'd pay actual rent. Maybe just keep it empty for a while. We locked up. I drove back to my apartment. Sat on my couch, pulled out the card, read it again. Maybe when you're worth something. I thought about everything that had happened since Christmas morning. The calls, the manipulation, the fake rent claims, the court hearing, all of it because they couldn't accept that the disappointment had power over them. My phone rang, unknown number. I answered without thinking. It was Meredith. She asked if I'd seen the house. Said yes. She said good. That she wanted me to see what I'd done, what I'd reduced them to. I asked if she meant the damage they'd deliberately left. She said that wasn't damage. That was just them not having time to clean because I'd rushed them out. I asked Meredith if she remembered Christmas morning. She said, of course. I asked if she remembered what she'd said to me. She said she'd already apologized for that. I said she'd never apologized. She said she tried to explain that it was the same thing, that I was being stubborn about accepting it. I asked what exactly she was apologizing for. She said for hurting my feelings. That she hadn't meant to hurt my feelings, that everything she'd said was true, but she could have said it nicer. I asked if she still thought I was a disappointment. She said that wasn't the point. I said it was exactly the point. She said I'd proven her right anyway. That a real success wouldn't need to throw his family out to feel important. That what I'd done showed I was exactly what she'd always known I was. Small, petty, vindictive, someone who'd rather hurt people than admit he wasn't good enough. I told Meredith I had to go. She said we weren't finished. I said, yes, we were. She said, I destroyed the family. That Alfred was humiliated in front of his brother. That Emma's reputation at the hospital was damaged. That Malcolm and Liz's marriage was strained. That Hugh was traumatized. That all of this was my fault. I asked whose fault it was that they treated me like garbage for 6 years. She said I was exaggerating, that we'd had normal family conflicts, that I was taking everything out of proportion, that my sensitivity had always been a problem, that I'd never been able to handle criticism or disappointment. I hung up. She called back. I didn't answer. Alfred called. Then Emma, then Malcolm, all from different numbers, all with the same message in their voicemails. That I was destroying the family. That I'd regret this. That someday I'd realize what I'd lost. But I hadn't lost anything. They had. They'd lost the house I'd saved, the free rent I'd provided, the financial security I'd given them, all because they couldn't treat me with basic respect, all because I wasn't the son and brother they'd wanted me to be. I sold the house 3 months later, got a good price, used some of the money to upgrade my apartment, put the rest in investments, blocked every family member on everything, changed my number, made it clear to mutual acquaintances that I wasn't interested in updates about how they were doing. I heard things anyway. Small town, people talk. Malcolm and Liz's marriage did end. Apparently, the stress of cramped living and financial pressure was too much. Emma had to drop to part-time at her residency to afford her portion of rent. Alfred and Meredith stayed with the uncle for 8 months before finding a small rental they could barely afford on retirement income. They told people I was cruel, that I'd abandoned them, that money had changed me, that I wasn't the person they'd raised. And maybe they were right about that last part. I wasn't the person they'd raised anymore. I was the person who'd stopped letting them use me. Some Reddit users asked if I ever felt guilty. The answer is no. Not once. Not when I filed the eviction. Not when I sat in that courtroom. Not when I walked through the damaged house they'd left behind. Not when I signed the sale papers. Because every time I thought about feeling guilty, I remembered Christmas morning. I remembered the card. I remembered Meredith saying I wasn't worth the money. Alfred asking if I was going to cry. Emma saying I was at the bottom. Hugh calling me a pathetic failure. Malcolm laughing. I remembered 6 years of being treated like I didn't matter by people who owed me everything. So no, I don't feel guilty. I feel free. And that card they left on the mantle, the one that said maybe when you're worth something, I framed it. Hung it in my home office. Look at it every day. A reminder that I don't need their approval. Never did. I'm worth something. I always was. They just couldn't see it because they were too busy looking down on me to notice I was the only thing holding them up.